Hello, my name is Andrew Keane. Welcome to Keane on America, the daily show about everything that matters, with the world's leading commentators and thinkers. Hello, everybody. It's Monday, the 5th of January. New year, old subject. We are focusing, it would seem, this week on education, on its role in America, both as a savior and a problem. Later this week, we have the former New York Times writer, James Traub, who has a new book out, The Cradle of Citizenship, How Schools Can Help Save Our Democracy. So it's a book about education, fixing American democracy. But today we are looking from the other end of the barrel. There's a really interesting new book out. It's out in 10 days. It's called Miracle Children by two New York Times reporters, Katie Benner and Erica Green. And it's about the problems of education. It's a book about a school called the T.M. Landry College Preparatory School, which is quite a story. And I'm thrilled that both Erica Green and Katie Benner are joining us. Erica, let's start with you. Before we get into the details of the book, why do you think education is both seen as the promise of saving America and at the same time a mirror of all its problems?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us, and thank you for your interest in our book and sharing it with your listeners. And, I would say that, schoolhouses throughout history have been, you know, a, a kind of lab. They have been a mirror of society. When you go back to even before Brown v. Board, we were living in a country where only certain people got opportunities, only certain people were afforded an education, and that was very much mirrored in who ran the world, right? It was white, um, not upper class, but middle class to upper class white people in this country. And, when you see the civil rights battles and the progresses throughout history, they happen in schools. We see, you have the iconic images of society crossing a threshold into is some semblance of equality, and what that evokes is the picture of Ruby Bridges being walked into a school to integrate it. A lot of the cultural battles that have been fought, won, and lost have really come about and been reflected in education and in the education system, and who is granted opportunity, who has advantages, who doesn't. It's been the great divider and the great uniter. So that is why people feel so strongly about education. It's why schoolhouses have become, again, throughout history, even up until the present day, the battlegrounds for the nation's soul, and whether it progresses or regresses.
If indeed a nation does or can have a soul. Katie, perhaps, is there anything you wanted to add to Erica's remarks about education as both the problem and the promise in America?
Yeah, I mean, I think that she encapsulated it so well. Education is very simply, it is both the tool and the emblem for how the United States thinks about and actually creates the circle of of us in America. Who gets to belong here is so much defined by who gets to go to school and what kind of education they get to have and its quality. So not only is it, as Erica so eloquently put it, a defining factor, a way of looking at who gets to be considered an American, it's also a tool that allows us to broaden or to narrow the definition in the circle of who is part of the country.
The book is based on a piece that you guys wrote in November of 2018. And it strikes me that if you'd have written a novel about this, people would say, well, this can't be true. It's not possible. But of course, it's a piece of nonfiction rather than fiction. It's almost as if, and I'm not sure who wants to take this question, Erica or Katie, it's almost as if a fiction writer in the heavens made this thing up to point to all the deficiencies and problems in the education system. Is that fair?
Okay. I mean, you've covered education for so long.
Look, I mean, on some level, we've had these stories that have seemed too good to be true. And I will say that when, I didn't encounter TM Landry uh the first time when we did this story. I was an education reporter. I saw the videos, I shared them widely. I was happy for the students. And so, you couldn't it when we heard this might not be true, it was difficult to believe for the very reason that you said, because you couldn't, I mean, it was devastating. But I really didn't want to believe it until I went down to Louisiana myself. I really didn't. I was like, there has to be some catch here. There has to be, but it wasn't. I mean, it's devastatingly, um, it felt devastatingly concocted, just like the applications were, right?
Yeah,
Um,
it's
that's exactly right. Like,
you
it's
say
you
too
couldn't.
good to be true. It's bad. It's too bad to be
Too
true. I don't know
bad
why
to
I'm
be
laughing.
true.
I should be crying. It's this
Yeah.
remarkable story of T.M. Landry College Preparatory that speaks to so many of the problems both in and out of the American education system. Perhaps, Katie, you might tell us briefly. I don't want tell us everything about this school because we want people to read the book. But what is it about this school that is so astonishing, both so sad and infuriating?
Yeah, I think that there are two themes that we really hit on. One is through the lens of a school that was created. Excuse me. The first theme is that education is something that does confer citizenship and it does confer opportunity, especially now that there aren't a lot of blue collar jobs, there aren't a lot of working class positions left in America. College has become such a prize to be won, and it's life changing now in a way that it probably wasn't 25 years ago. So enter into this moment in history. A couple named Mike and Tracy Landry, for whom the school TM Landry is named. They see this opportunity. They see how hungry people in their own community are to be able to send their kids to a good college and change their lives. And so they create a school that they say is intended to do that. And at the same time, they're able to really understand that universities are in that same moment looking for qualified, excellent Black students who can help these schools overcome their own legacies of discrimination and exclusion. And so it's almost like a perfect moment in history for this couple to say, we will produce these students for you. However, when most of the book is told through the eyes of the students, what they actually do to create those results for the students and for the colleges to get some of these kids into top tier Ivy League schools, top NESCAC schools, are measures that we have to really question. Why did these measures make sense? Why did these incredible moments of coercion, of corporal punishment, and of falsified records, why did they seem like a solution to a problem around race in America that's existed for a long time, and a solution that even made sense to the kids themselves?
Erica, tell me about these two people, Michael and Tracy Landry. They're the founders of the school, right? Are they local Louisiana people?
Yes, they were both born and bred in Louisiana, so they tell it. And from our reporting, Michael, they grew up. Mike in particular, he grew up in what he liked to call, the back of the tracks. Did I have that right, Katie? um, and very, very, impoverished. Mike was born and raised by an alcoholic mother. He talks, part of his pitch was to talk about his hardscrabble upbringing, which, involved having brothers who were into drugs. Well, you'll find out in the book what happens to them, and not wanting to go down the same path toward death and destruction, and education was his only way out. Tracy, has talked extensively about having an illiterate mother, working hard at education to, go to college, become a nurse. So they both had very much the upbringing, and very much, and they both talked extensively about their upbringing, to pitch to families that they understood what it was like to have education be a vehicle out of poverty, and despair. So they both had these very inspiring stories that they would ultimately encourage their students to either adapt, or make up, to get to their vehicle to opportunity, right? So they were very, Mike very charismatic, Tracy very convincing, very seemed very warm and loving. They had a persona that very much appealed, to the families of Louisiana, where the education system has struggled for forever, and particularly for Black students, has really failed them for a really long time. And I say that as an informed education reporter. And so these two were just kind of the avatars of the American dream for Black students in particular from Louisiana, but from the South. So that's who they were.
Katie, there's a Gatsby-esque quality to these two characters. And of course, the wonderful thing about Fitzgerald's Gatsby is that he presents Gatsby as both a victim and a villain of his narrative. Do you see Michael and Tracy Landry as equally villains and victims of American society and the education system?
So I think this is a really good question. And I like to think about what the students themselves said about Mike and Tracy, because even though Eric and I spent some time with them, we were able to interview them. It's really the students who spent the most time with them and who were attracted to them, who wanted to be part of their school, who felt like this couple wanted to give them hope and wanted to give them opportunity. There's a sense, I think, that the students said again and again that Mike and Tracy accurately diagnosed real problems in American education, that nobody doubted them when they said, listen, there's a reason why if you're standing here in front of us, you're not getting a fair shot. There's a reason why the world has already lowered their expectations of you and that it's unfair. And that's something that the students deeply felt. However, as time progressed and they saw the Landrys use the success of the students themselves, their ability to get into schools like Harvard, Stanford, and Yale as calling cards and ways to make money, as they saw the way they were manipulating the students, pitting them against one another, turning this almost into a Hunger Games style culture where only a few would really survive and thrive, and it depended on their complete fealty to the Landrys. That's when the students also would say that not only did they diagnose problems correctly in the broader system, they also exploited those problems to take advantage of themselves and their families, their financial situations, and the colleges.
Do you want to add something on this, Erica? I mean, do you agree with Katie that they're both the victim and the villain? No one forced these people to do this. I mean, what did they do wrong? Did they make stuff up? Is their worst crime, if that's the right word, bullying the kids, shaming the kids, or just lying so that the school became more and more of a kind of a symbol of the American dream?
Well, I think that's honestly one of the compelling things about the book is, all of these questions are good ones. And I don't think that there is like a definitive answer once you get the whole story. I've spoken to people who have read it, and, one person said, I came out of this book, you know, the big surprise for them was that maybe Michael Landry wasn't the real villain here. And I thought I mean, I didn't even know what to think about that because we had documented so much of the horrors that he caused these students and the emotional scars, the physical abuse. I think that really this idea that Black children should have to endure abuse to be successful, that they had to be damaged to be seen as valuable. His perpetuating that was very detrimental, not just to the students, but to the progresses of Black children in this country since Brown v. Board, and even before. That was very harmful. At the end of the day, you know, this too good to be true narrative didn't come out of nowhere. The reason that everyone was so excited about these videos was because they thought it could not be done, or they knew that the students had to endure so much for it to be done. And for him to have exploited that and fabricated and confirmed the worst fears that any student, Black student who works hard and wants to earn and achieve, for him to undermine that was just, devastating, not just to the students who were directly harmed, but to students nationwide. That's the first thing. And I mean, victim, I don't know if I don't know if I would cast them as as victims of anything, other than their own, greed. um, because that's ultimately, as you'll see in the book, what consumed them. They transitioned from wanting students to be successful to wanting to enrich themselves and to be successful themselves by any means necessary, and they use these students. So the victims here were very much the students and the families. The villain, that's shared among many, including this country.
Yeah, although it's hard to, I mean, you can blame a whole country. It's hard, though, to make it legally accountable. The subtitle of the book is Race, Education, and a True Story of False Promises. The school is in Louisiana, and as you've noted, it's as much a story of race and of African Americans. Why, Katie, is it a story of race? Presumably, I mean, did you have to be? You don't have to be black to. You didn't have to be black to go to the Landry School, did you? So, why is race so central?
Yeah, this is a great question because you're right. You didn't have to be Black to go to the school, and there were many students who weren't. There were students who were South Asian, Asian, and white. But let's take a step back, and we probably should mention a couple of things that we haven't really touched on explicitly. The first is that one of the things that made this school so famous were viral videos of Black students getting into Harvard, Princeton, Yale, etc. Now, there were also videos of students who went to TM Landry who were white getting into Harvard, getting into great schools, Syracuse, getting into top 100 schools. Those videos didn't go viral at all. And so I think that one of the first questions we have to ask ourselves, which in the prologue to the book, a lawyer asks as well, is why is it so extraordinary when a Black person achieves something, but considered so normal when a white person achieves something? Because, the kids were featured on CBS This Morning, The Today Show, Ellen DeGeneres, The Talk Show. Nobody in those segments, in those news segments or those talk show segments, wanted to talk to a white student who got into Harvard. That wasn't the extraordinary thing.
Even I'm jumping in here, Katie. Even if that white student was from West Virginia and was
these white students were from a very poor part of Louisiana.
So you're suggesting that the only reason they ever get on these big TV shows or they got viral videos on YouTube was the color of their skin?
I mean, listen, we couldn't find. The students certainly felt that way, and I would say, I'm curious, maybe we should have asked Ellen DeGeneres and her producers why they cared more about the Black students who got into great schools. We could have asked CBS This Morning why they cared more about the Black students who got into great schools and not somebody who was white. We could have asked NBC. We could have asked a variety of people. We could have asked the people who were sharing the videos and making them go viral, because certainly the videos of the white kids weren't going viral. So I do think that this is a really good question. Why was it that a video of a Black student achieving what we think of as the highest heights, achieving the greatest rewards in the American education system, why did that feel like such a moment of both extraordinary pride and excitement and just celebration of an achievement that feels impossible? Like, why does it feel impossible? And I think you're asking a very good question. So that
But you guys, I shouldn't really be. I'm not sure I should be asking the question. You're the two New York Times reporters. If you didn't ask the question, firstly, why not? And secondly, what do you think the answer is?
I think that when we do say explicitly that the reason why this feels extraordinary is because the expectations for Black people are so low. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing that we haven't explicitly said is that one of the ways that the students were getting into these college is on their college essays and their applications. They were told to lie and say that they had suffered basically the very worst stereotypes of what could befall a person in America who's Black. They were encouraged to lie and say they had a drug-addicted parent. They had lived as without homes, without housing, that they had not had enough food to eat, that they had grown up surrounded by rats, roaches, bullets flying. And again, why is it that that is such a compelling narrative, and that Mike and Tracy were so certain that that story would work for a Black student applying to a predominantly white institution, but that they didn't encourage white students to talk about their white poverty, right? Their stereotypically white poverty. The white students, who we don't really address as much in this book in our reporting, they were asked to write things like, thanks to Mike and Tracy, I learned that I'm really, really racist and that I didn't understand Black America. So certainly they understood something about race in America. They understood that the expectations are lower for Black people and that they wanted to exploit that to give these students what they saw as a leg up. And whether or not admissions officials would admit that these stories are extremely compelling to them, these kids were getting into Ivy League schools, and they were not saying, I'm just a working class smart kid, which is also, I think, a very compelling story, but that's not the story Mike and Tracy believed and then successfully got these kids into college based on.
Can I
Erica.
jump in here? Yeah, I mean, let's just be clear. It's not that was the whole pitch, right? If you look at the media appearances that Mike and Tracy did over several years, which we did and studied extensively. If if you watch the dialogue with journalists over the years, the subtext and also very explicitly it was about getting Black kids into these schools. I mean, when Mike Landry was questioned, when a journalist would express any skepticism about his methods and his results, he immediately pivoted to why is this possible for other kids but not my Black kids? Right? I mean, that was his defense. and journalists to be honest would like immediately kind of back down and accepted the whole and it wasn't just that the white kids didn't go viral like when he put predominantly no mostly maybe almost entirely Black children on the internet to be celebrated. And when they were celebrated, when he posted the Facebook posts, when he talked about them in different appearances, there was always an emphasis on the fact that TM Landry was doing this for Black children.
He
And that
himself is Black. I mean, are you suggesting
yes.
a degree of racism? Did they just figure out that they could take
Well, is it
advantage of the
racism?
white liberals in the admissions department of these
Is it
top
racism
universities?
or is it opportunity? I think that so much of what the Landrys were able to get away with was created by opportunity. Opportunities that were created over time by a country that has really struggled to figure out how it wants to and whether it wants to integrate Black Americans. So, for example, the school's pretty much unregulated in ways that a lot of other places in America would find shocking. But in Louisiana, in this struggle to figure out how to keep schools segregated in the first half of the 20th century, a lot of regulations were lifted for certain categories of school that weren't public schools. And so he basically ran an unregulated school in a state that allows unregulated schools to operate. Now, that's an opportunity created by a system that wanted to keep segregated education. He didn't make that rule, but he certainly took advantage of it. He didn't make a world where Ivy League schools spent the first 100+ years of their existence excluding Jewish students, excluding Black students, and excluding Asian students, and using the kinds of measures that we think of as affirmative action policies to do so, right? Giving students who were wealthy and elite breaks on their test scores by measuring them for other things: athleticism, charm, ability to contribute to a community. Those are all things that we criticize affirmative action programs for doing. Those things existed for decades and decades and decades before the first Black person, before affirmative action programs were, allowed Black students to en masse enroll in institutions of higher education. And they were used to preserve a racial hierarchy. They were used to preserve a white supremacist racial hierarchy. So again, once those tools are turned on their head and used to help more Black students or used to help more Jewish students get into college, is Mike being racist, or is he simply taking advantage of tools that are suddenly open to him in a way that he implicitly understands? He understands that there's a discomfort when it comes to talking about race amongst elite white people in liberal institutions. I think that it would be hard for us to say with a straight face that people who are white in elite spaces feel comfortable talking about racism and any kind of complicity that they might have in that system. And Mike sensed it and he seized on it. And so he loved talking about race with these people. He loved making himself an example of what it means to be Black in America and come up from nothing and use education to get ahead. And the response was overwhelmingly positive, because who are they to push back on this guy?
Erica, you cover the current White House for the New York Times, so you're all too familiar with the anti-DEI rhetoric, ideology of the current president. Could your book be used as an argument by the MAGA people to suggest that DEI is just a disaster and it only lends itself to scams like the school you write about?
Of course. I make no qualms about that. But I mean, of course, and it probably will be. But I will just say that 1 month after we published the story on TM Landry, the Varsity Blues scandal broke.
Yeah.
1 month. And so it was a striking juxtaposition to see people be, very sympathetic to the students of TM Landry, rightfully outraged. But just a month later, yes, there was outrage about wealthy parents in Hollywood and other places buying their children's admissions into college. But there was never really a reckoning with the fact that that has happened for a century, right? Which I think, if you read our book, you will read a lot about that too. So, this idea that yes, DEI, the clamor for diversity and inclusion, can lead to a perversion of a system that is just as true as has been evidenced and demonstrated over over generations, that very much is the case for white and wealthy people as well.
Katie, another piece of this, which at least comes to my mind, is this convergence of education and sports. You noted earlier the way in which some of these admission letters from Harvard and other top institutions went viral on YouTube. And it reminds me of the college draft or the professional draft sporting tournaments. And of course, again, African Americans, I think, are overrepresented when it comes to sports and underrepresented on the education and economic front. Is there a broader problem here in cultural communication, media terms, with the way in which African Americans are represented in the media and the way in which they represent themselves?
Well, I think that the answer to your question is yes. I don't know if TM Landry is actually a great illustration of that, simply because none of these kids were drafted and none of them played sports. There were no sports teams at TM Landry.
No, but my point is it's sort of covered in the same way as a kind of miracle, a Hollywood story.
Absolutely. And I think that that's what we said at the beginning. It was like, well, why is it that this is so inspiring and such a big deal? And then I think the second question, which we do try to answer, is why are we blind to the fact that this is not a wholly positive thing? Why are we blind? Why do we willfully want these students to be so extraordinary and to celebrate for them for that, but not actually interrogate why we think it's so weird and interesting and crazy and wonderful that a Black student could achieve something that's so intellectually difficult? And I think that there is a way in which these students, there's a scholar named Imani Perry, who we quote in the book, and she talks about how there's American exceptionalism, but that there's a racial exceptionalism and how it functions in society. And one of the things she talks about is the fact that these are the kinds of stories. We live in a narrative world. We are human beings. We tell our lives in stories. We understand the world in stories. These stories provide almost a relief valve to give us release some of the pressure that is on the country as it struggles with race day in and day out. It's like every once in a while, a story like this lets us say, see, the system does work. We haven't fully excluded every single Black person from a position of power or opportunity. The country is actually A-okay. And so that kind of relief valve, that pressure relief, is really important to the system to keep it working. It's important to our lives. It's important for us if we want to get up in the morning and be glad and excited that we live in the United States. And so they serve an important function that compels us to not look too closely and to not interrogate too much why we care so much about this representation, the visual representation, the storytelling representation, as you mentioned before.
Erica, clearly this is a book and a story that reflects in many ways the worst sides of the American education system. But what does it teach us about reforming it? I mean, clearly, I mentioned I'm talking to James Traub, your former colleague, about using education to build more of a sense of citizenship in America. What did this book, I mean, you wrote about it back in November of 2018. You've spent many years researching it. The book's coming out next week. What did it teach you about making the American education system fairer for everybody and less of a fraud and less just annoying and upsetting and absurd?
Thank you for capturing all of the things I felt. Yeah, that's a good question. It's a complicated one. I mean, I will say that, even as an education reporter, over the course of reporting and writing this book, I had to rethink my coverage from a decade ago. I covered education for 13 years. I covered incessantly who was up and who was down in test scores, right? The test prep culture was just intense. And as a reporter, on test score day, I, hurried to figure out who went up, who went down, who may have cheated. I covered many of cheating scandals. And I did, and reflecting upon that, it's just like the amount of pressure that society, that the media, that educators themselves have placed on children to overperform, to meet these kind of arbitrary metrics over the years has been insanely, detrimental, as we've seen over time. That's why we had like No Child Left Behind. That's why we had huge cheating scandals. And honestly, if you look at those, a lot of the spotlight was on Black districts and Black children, because every reform has always been about lifting Black students out of failure. And if you didn't do that, you were a failure too. And I just look back over time. I mean, as you saw in the book, we get into how we like lionize these figures throughout history who were just punishing, and they were violent, and they were determined to make Black children perform by any means necessary. And everyone thought that that was okay. right? Like we revered these figures. So you were either, you know, a punishing figure, you were a savior. All of these things that we've tried haven't worked. And and as a result, you know, the when it comes to Black children in particular, it's about like just the next shiny object or the next pressure lever or, you know, the next big reform or type of school or type of model. Like we treat them that like they're mice in a lab when like at the end of the day, they can just be taught. And yes, there are so many, and I'm not Pollyanna-ish about this. There are so many extenuating circumstances that yes, they have to deal with that their white and other counterparts don't. But like we also have to recognize that that has been baked in to a system. And I mean that's just reality, right? Like there are certain you know, things and experiences that Black children in this country due to their lineage have had to endure. But like everything is always on them. Like they bear the shame, the failure, the brunt of all of these other failures. And like the only way that we can make that right is to cut corners or beat them into it. I just don't that I don't accept that. And I what I learned over the course of reporting this book, even having covered the education system and even having been a part of this in my own way is that like that's just not the way. We're going to keep having TM Landrys. We're going to keep having circular conversations about affirmative action and DEI, and we're never going to get to the root of of what of where all of this strife has come from, which is systemic inequality. Period.
Uh, Katie, seems to me that the T.M. Landry story sort of combines the worst two aspects of some parts of the American education system. On the one hand, low standards, and on the other hand, this bullying quality. Mm. America always seems, you guys at the New York Times report on this all the time, never seems to do particularly well on the education league tables. It certainly doesn't compete well with Singapore or China or South Korea, who have incredibly competitive and often bullying systems of their own. If you were to compare the kind of culture that you exposed at T.M. Landry College Prep to the kind of culture, for example, that exists in South Korea, where the kids are also horribly bullied, although maybe not so much racially so, because it's a fairly monocultural society. How does the two compare, and what can we Americans both learn and unlearn from the Asian models?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, like in Japan, there are students committing suicide. You see that in Korea, in China. So these systems are not perfect. While they might produce good test score results, there are also certainly big questions that you would want to ask about whether or not that's the kind of pressure you want to put on students. You know, I think one of the interesting things about comparing TM Landry and what the Landrys were doing to schools in other countries, because certainly Mike Landry was very aware of what was going on in Singapore, I think is probably the best example, is that TM Landry both, it's in many ways universal. The challenges of getting all students to achieve at some sort of level that we would consider sets them up for success is very hard no matter where you go. I think it also shows how unique the US is, because one of the things TM Landry shows us is that there is a real, that we operate on multiple levels in America. We operate on this like spoken, these are our ideals, these are what we want, this is how the world should work level. And that's so much what we do as journalists. We write stories saying, this is a company, this is a school, this is an organization that didn't live up to how we should play by the rules. And then we live on this unspoken world where we all know how the game is really played. It's like that French film, The Rules of the Game, right? It's like we say that the world should operate in an egalitarian and meritocratic fashion, but we're also really comfortable when it doesn't, right? When we see students who are getting into college using in the Operation Varsity Blues scandal, we're horrified, But did that really change the fact that wealthy people in America can kind of do what they want, get what they want, and not play by the rules? It was, like Amani Perry said, a little relief valve. We got to take some of the pressure off and say, okay, see, rich people do have to play by the rules, but they don't really. They had to in that instance. It was like 30 of them, and then we move on. With TM Landry, you see this sort of brutal system, and everybody can criticize it and say, wow, that's really, really wrong. But does that end the brutal system, or does it act as a relief valve? And so I think that, again, you're right. There are things that can be learned from systems overseas, certainly around standards, around standardized testing, which are really important in Asia. There's much less, the big kind of blanket criticisms, you don't get as much creative thought. There's no Silicon Valley happening in South Korea. There's no Silicon Valley happening in Japan. That comes from creativity, freedom, things that are not part of those education systems. So there's, to your point, you can say that there's a lot of success that comes from a more rote, a more intense, and a more almost militaristic education system like the one we see pieces of at TM Landry. But keep in mind, what we see at TM Landry is only a system that we accept for certain kinds of kids in America. Kids who are not white, kids who are not rich, kids who don't have opportunities, kids who live on Native American reservations. That's not really the system that we want for everyone. We can pretend that these are universal concepts, but they really, really, really are, divided. Our experiences really are divided around things like race and socioeconomic status.
We're at the beginning of the year, so let's try and end on a positive, cheerful note.
Because this is such a positive, cheerful topic.
Yeah, I know it's, but I'm sure that in all seriousness, that's kind of my question. I know you cover some of the students who dropped out of places like Wesleyan because of depression after all this stuff was exposed. But are there any positive narratives that we can take from your exposure? Were there kids that maybe profited from the corrupt nature of the system who actually benefited from all this?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, there are kids who went to places like NYU and Yale and graduated and are doing well. Second of all, there are students who came out of this and realized that they didn't actually want the life that Mike Landry had promised them. This, like, you get to go to a top college and then go work at Goldman Sachs. They actually made the decision. What they wanted to do is they wanted to live near their families in Louisiana and make a living, having a job that they enjoyed, owning their own small business. That not everybody in America wants to go to Harvard and then become a Supreme Court justice, and that's okay. And I think that that's something we've really lost sight of in the United States, that there was a world before globalization and before the 1990s, before the utter destruction of the manufacturing economy. There was a world where people could have what the country agreed upon as interesting, valid lives without having fancy degrees and white-collar jobs, and that is also okay. And so I think that it would be positive for America to understand that not everybody has to have a specific white-collar life in order to be considered full citizens who deserve dignity. And the students have found that for themselves. And so I just hope that the rest of the country catches up and treats them the same way, that they treat themselves, see themselves, and believe that they are worthy, no matter whether or not they went to college, no matter how they did. Yes, some certainly were big success stories in the colleges they went to, some were not, but they've come out of this experience understanding that they are very, very worthwhile, of respect and of dignity and of opportunity. And they don't need a Mike Landry and they don't need a Harvard to confer that on them.
Let's end with you, Erica. It sounds to me, I mean, if some people might think what Katie's saying is she's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, simply saying, well, what you've learned from all this is that failure is okay. What's your conclusion? And are there positive messages we can take from your book?
Well, I certainly, first of all, don't think that is what she said at all. I think, and so anyone who would draw that conclusion, I don't understand. But I would say that, at the very least, like, the Harvards and the Yales and the Ivy Leagues are not the end all and be all. What they have become over time for some people, and because of how society is structured and because of what we have imposed on students about what success looks like and what it doesn't, is they have become these, like, they've become these ivory towers that everyone, believed that if they did not get into them, then they would not, they would not reach the American dream. It's like become the pipeline to any success in this country. And we became so obsessed with them, because of what they've represented over, throughout history. And I think people don't know a lot of that history either. So I think, failure is not okay. But the pressure to fit a mold of an antiquated system that was created for an elite few is not either. And so that's what I would say. And in terms of success stories, I will just say, the students, those who failed out, some who left, some who just were absolutely brilliant and doing wonderfully, but couldn't continue to afford the price tag of a college education. Um, they're happy. They have children, they have jobs, they have degrees. Some of them have 2 degrees. They have jobs, and, like, that is for them, that was the American dream, to be able to go to a school, do something that you love, get a degree, get a great job, take care of your family, and that's what we all want, right? Like, that nothing really distinguishes them at all, other than that they had to go through hell to achieve what is afforded, sometimes given to others. So, so they, I think you'll come away from this book. There is a "Where Are They Now" section, and you go on their journeys with them. And I think, when you read through their eyes and through their words, and they have nothing to hide. They've already exposed themselves to the world. They have nothing to pretend. They are not miracle children anymore. They are young adults living their lives. They had a shared traumatic experience, which is not new for Black children in this country, but they all wanted to just live. And so that is the common thread here. And the American dream looks differently for different people. So that's what
There
I
you
would
have
say.
it. The book is out next week. It's going to be, I think, one of the big books of the year about one of the most important subjects. It could be called, actually, not Miracle Children. It's called Miracle Children. It's by, I don't want to suggest you change the title. It's probably a bit late now. By my guest,
It's harder
Erica
now,
Green,
yes.
and the publisher will kill me. Erica Green and Katie Benner, both at the New York Times. Congratulations, Erica and Katie, on the book and on a really interesting conversation. It's really nice to come across a book about such an important subject without any trite conclusions, which all we need to do is do this or that, and it all gets solved. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Well, thank
Excellent
you for having us.
questions.
Yes, thank
This
you
was
for such a great interview.
wonderful, wonderful conversation. Hard, tough questions. I love it. It was great. Thank you.